join me in giving a warm Star Day welcome to Provost Claudette Zaleski.
Well, it's a privilege to be with all of you. Thank you so much for turning out. Thank you to my front row seats. And all of you get gold stars for being here. Well, we're here to talk about leadership. So I want to lean back on my own disciplinary training as a social psychologist. Also bring in some of the research that I've conducted over the years. I'm also working in the business school, and I'm thinking about leadership when I did my MBA here at Fresno State. So I want to think about leadership as a behavior. And behavior is actually a math equation. Did all of you know that? And so as a statistician, I love equations. So I share with you the math equation for behavior. And so this, for those of you that studied psychology, is the Kurt Lewin, and that's L-E-W-I-N. Some people call that Lewin, but his name was Kurt Lewin. He's the founder of social psychology. And B is behavior. Beta is behavior. And behavior is equal to a function of P, the person, in the E, environment. So as we talk about our talk today, I want you to think about these pieces as they intertwine in our discussion about leadership, which in fact is a behavior. So I'm going to highlight sort of the journey of how I began to think about leadership. How many of you in here have heard the notion, if you want it done right, do it yourself? You heard Lieutenant Rio say that, right? How many of you abide by that behavior? All right, good. So we're going to debunk some myths today. This is going to be a lecture where I think that I'll share with you some things that you might think is a true statement of scientific fact, and I'll bring to the forefront research that shows things that might spin your head a little bit in terms of how we think about leadership. So let me first talk about social psychology. As many of you know, I taught as an adjunct here at Fresno State in psychology. I was a statistics teacher. I went back as a re-entry student to get my PhD. I had 3 children at the time, and I was approaching 40. So it was a big venture to go back and have to leave Fresno to go and get a PhD, which is a 5 to 7 year journey. So when I went back to get a PhD in social psychology, it was really interesting. Alex Gonzalez, as some of you probably know, president of Sacramento State, just retiring, was actually my department chair. He's the person that hired me. And when it came time for me to be thinking about this burning that I had in me about going forward to get a doctorate, it was Alex Gonzalez who said, you have to do it. You have to move forward if you have that burn. That burn is not going to go away. And I said, but how am I going to do that? I've got 3 children at home, and I really need to develop focus here in terms of what I'm going to be studying. So it was very interesting because he said, don't worry about the details of this. It all works out. And in fact, he turned out to be right. It in fact was all true. Well, in that same discussion, I remember he said to me, and I want to sort of make you realize how early I was in this journey of studying behavior. He said to me, so what area of psychology do you think that you want to study for a doctorate? And I said, I don't know. And he said, well, you have to decide that before you put in your applications. So it was that conversation that he advised me to use my statistics background and to move forward to think about social psychology. And indeed, it was very good advice. So psychology, as I just mentioned, is the study of behavior of an individual. And as an individual animal, it's not always a human animal, but a study of behavior. Social psychology is a subdiscipline of psychology. It is the study of behavior in the context of a social environment. So as you see from Kurt Lewin's equation, the E, environment, which includes the social environment, is very, very important to predicting your behavior. We cannot disregard it. So that, in fact, is going to be one of the threads that I think will be surprising to you. Most people think that behavior is derived from internal traits and characteristics. You behave because of the way you're genetically put together, and that's main driver of your behavior. In fact, that is an important driver of your behavior. But one thing that people forget is the context, the situational part of behavior. And that's what I want to share with you with regard to leadership behavior. So humans as social animals, and that's another thing that's very important to realize. In the United States, we are an individualistic culture. So we think of ourselves as the drivers of our own universe. I have something interesting to share with you. The rest of the world, the majority of the world, is not an individualistic culture. They are collectivistic. And so collectivistic cultures have a much greater appreciation for how we get things done, how we live our lives within social environments. And so I want to point out that as social animals, that's not just a luxury that we're social animals, that we enjoy being in one another's company. It is actually the way we're genetically wired. So social animals require others to survive and also to thrive. Require, it's essential. And I think oftentimes we think, I don't really need anybody else. I can get this done on my own. So remember that as we begin this journey on thinking about leadership and the importance of others in your world and how you can work in that world effectively as we think about social psychology. Leadership, in fact, is a behavior, as I just mentioned. And one thing I want to point out here, you can't be a leader without others, right? And you're not a leader if others don't follow, okay? So those are two important pieces to be thinking about in terms of the equation. The other thing that I think you probably will find interesting is that leadership is very much related to personality characteristics. There's a robust body of research that says that leaders, in fact, do have characteristics in their personality, and that they are correlated. And so those of you who know about statistics, that means it's related to. But it is not necessary to. So one of the things that you see about that research is that you'll often hear people say, well, leaders, they're usually extroverts, right? How many of you have heard that? They're very comfortable in front of people. They are extroverted. They're good social animals, right? In fact, that is one of the traits that is correlated with leadership. But let me caution you here. There are many great leaders who do not have the trait of extroversion. When you think of extroverts and leadership, you probably think of people like JFK, FDR, and there's many, many others, right? But what about Gandhi? Extrovert? What about Mother Teresa? Extrovert? What about Martin Luther King Jr.? Now, some of you will say, that's one of the greatest orators of all history. Did you know that before he got on stage, he would always suffer from anxiety and hiccups because he's not an extrovert? Myself, not an extrovert. Learned extroversion is typically what you see in leadership. So leadership is highly situational. And I'm going to point to some examples from books that I think are important for you to, that you put on your summer reading list that illustrate this. So interestingly, when we think about leadership, oftentimes we think about leaders are born, right? How many of you have heard that? It's a born leader. Born leader. That's a myth. And isn't that a good myth? Because if you're not born a leader, you still have the opportunity to be a leader if it's situational. Everyone can be a leader. And in fact, that's what the research is clearly showing, is that leaders are made. Leadership is learned. Yes, it does help to have certain types of dispositions, but in fact, experiences are probably a greater predictor of your effectiveness in leadership than those personality traits. So a big surprise. Now let me give you an example. When I was in my MBA program, and again, this was after I was professor of psychology. So in my MBA class, there were 2 women, 25 students, 2 women. Both of us had a PhD. The rest of the group were highly successful men, 1 fighter pilot, Top Gun pilot, many CEOs, lots and lots of CPAs, accountants. So one day, Rudy Sanchez, who was actually the teacher in leadership, comes into the room. He says, well, gentlemen, and then he looked at the 2 women, doctors. So here's what I want you to do. If you think that leaders are born, please stand over on this side of the wall. And if you think that leaders are made, please stand over here. And all of the confident males marched over to this side of the room. Yeah, born leaders, right? That's my son, that's my family, that's who we are. And then there's one sole little woman walking over to this side of the room. And then I heard the Top Gun pilot say, uh-oh, gentlemen, I think we might be wrong. And in fact, the research is evident, and one of the men in the room said, you know, now that I think about it, you know, my kid is a great leader on the football field. But when I send him to Sunday school, he is not a leader, right? Now that's the point that we're going to be talking about. Situations can predict your leadership and your success at leadership. And again, this is all founded in the scientific research. So that was an aha moment for my classmates, and we laughed over that moment many times. So I want to, again, be clear. All of you have the potential to be leaders. It's learned. And did you also hear me say that it's experience that teaches you how to be a leader? So, what we're going to be talking about is what kind of experiences make you a leader. And one of the things I wanted to share with you are a few of those moments in my journey where I knew that what I thought about leadership had completely changed because of experience and because of what I had learned. When I had the opportunity to be an ACE fellow, I had a big takeaway. I went from Fresno State to the University of Maryland. I was at Towson University, which is part of the Maryland system, working with Dr. Robert Corrett, and also got a chance to work with a man who many do call a born leader, Freeman Hrabowski, president of the University of Maryland at Baltimore County. And it was wonderful to see Dr. Hrabowski in action. He is a professor of mathematics, African American. He was jailed at 8, marching for civil rights with Martin Luther King. As a child, he was jailed. And so he learned through this experience. He was an only child. He was the child of an English school teacher who had given him an extraordinary education. He can recite poetry on a moment's notice. But one of the things that I noticed about Freeman Hrabowski is that he was a humble, collaborative leader. He brought big ideas to everyday conversations, and he brought a charisma. And again, he's a quiet man until he's on stage, and then you see that that charisma is, again, related to his leadership effectiveness. It was he who said, I wonder, what do we need to do at the University of Maryland at Baltimore County to get behind this one vision? I'm wondering, why is it that we don't have any African Americans that make an A in freshman calculus? And all the professors said, Well, that's not true. I have someone that's really good in calculus, African American. And you know what he did? He pulled out his data. He said, oh, really? Well, I'm a professor of math, and I'm looking at this, and I don't know who you're talking about. That question, that boldness, was a question that he was able to articulate into a value and into a vision. And again, let me stay on point with regard to leadership and the importance of values and vision. One of my favorite books, and I've mentioned it in my talking points, is a book called The Contrarian's Guide to Leadership. And this is a book written by Stephen Sample. He's the President Emeritus of the University of Southern California. Stephen Sample is another extraordinary leader when we think about collaborative leader and servant leader. He, in fact, is an engineer, but he writes like a social psychologist. In his book, and this is a book I do recommend to you for summer reading, it's an extraordinarily important read. He cites leadership is highly situational. He talks about Washington, Lincoln. Those figures in a point in time were pivotal, key leaders at that point in time. But he makes the argument, if Abraham Lincoln walked into the room today, would he be in the right situation to be an effective leader? Because the situation, E, is part of whether or not you have effective behavior, in this case, successful leadership. He also says a leader who is successful is due to context and will not necessarily be a successful leader in a different context. That gets us back to the same idea as leader on the baseball field, football field, but not in Sunday school. At the same time, I had the opportunity to go to a Harvard program, and Tasha's heading off to that program this summer, and I'm really excited for you. Mitzi, you've been there. Dean Hironaka-Shuto has been there. And during this, and you'll recount this, the leader of the Harvard program, so I'm spoiling this, so you might want to have spoiler alert here, okay? On the very first day that we're there, and this again is a big aha moment in my thinking about collaborative leadership. The leader comes in a bustle. He says, quick, quick, everybody count off. We've got a really important exercise today. You've got to get right on it. And he says, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, in groups. Group 1, you're out in room so-and-so. Group 2, you're out in so-and-so. She says, listen, we only have 20 minutes because we got a very packed day here. So here's what I want you to do. This is a team building exercise, and he says, it's a survival game. And he says, now, take this seriously. He says, first of all, what I want you to do is I want you to realize yourself in this context. You are in a plane crash in the snow. I want to know, if I give you a list of things, what do you need to survive? Think quickly, he says. Here are your choices, and here are the details of the scenario. Your choices are a ball of steel wool, a small axe, a loaded .45 caliber pistol, a can of Crisco shortening, newspaper, cigarette lighter, extra shirt and pants for each survivor, 20 by 20 piece of heavy-duty canvas, a sectional air map made of plastic, 1 quart of whiskey, 100 proof, a compass, and a family-sized chocolate bar. Those are your choices. Here it is. You and your companions have just survived the crash of a small plane. Both the pilot and co-pilot were killed in the crash. It is mid-January, and you are in northern Canada. The daily temperature is 25 below zero, and the nighttime temperature is 40 below zero. There is snow on the ground, and the countryside is wooded with several creeks crisscrossing the arena. The nearest town is 20 miles away. You were all dressed in city clothes, appropriate for a business meeting. Your group of survivors managed to salvage the items that I just listed. Now, he says, first, before you go to your rooms, what are the top 4 things that you need to survive? Quick, write them down. Now, let me ask you, out of that list, let me give you them again. How many of you think you need a ball of steel wool to survive? No one. How many of you think you need a small axe? How many of you think you need a pistol? Can of Crisco? Ah, scout. Yeah. Newspaper. Cigarette lighter. Extra shirt and pants for each survivor. 20 by 20 heavy-duty canvas. Sectional air map. 1 quart of whiskey. That is the most hands. A compass. Here's what's my number 1, the bar of chocolate. All right? Now, he said, put that in your pocket, your choices. That's going to be important to you. Now get back in your rooms. And he said, and here's what you have to do. Now you have to think fast as a collaborative group. Your task as a group is to list the above 12 items in order of importance for your survival. Go. Now, here's what happens, all right? Everybody is looking at one another almost in panic, right? Some people, myself included, is sort of sitting back going, you know, I don't really care about this game. It's a game, and you know what? I pretty much trust my instincts here, right? You want it done right, do it yourself. Because that's been my MO, all right? Get in groups. Some people get in groups and start bossing the others, right? Gotta have this, gotta have this. Others will start arguing. No, I think you're wrong. I think it's something really weird we're supposed to have, right? It's probably one of the weird things. That's going to be the number 1. So this goes on for about 15 minutes. Next thing you know, here comes the leader again. Quick, hurry. This is survival. Do you have your list? At this point, now we are really on the clock, all right? Because we know that we're going to have to present. At this point, people start to get a bit more serious, right? And start to then actually collaborate. They get over their ego and they realize, okay, we really are in this all together. Now this is just play acting, but it feels very real. When we get back into the Harvard dark paneled conference room where we are taught over summer, he says, now, you have your list in front of you. Your list and your list with your group. How many of you have a list in comparison? These 2 lists look very different. Well, mine sure did. Mine didn't look anything like the group thing. And of course, I'm thinking the back of my head, I know mine's probably better. Right? And then he brings actually in a national expert in search and rescue. Tasha, here's where you have to close your ears. You can't know the answers. All right? And this is how Harvard is. You know, they always bring in people, they walk in the room and they go, oh my gosh, now we're really in for it, you know. So here comes a national expert in search and rescue, and he starts to berate us as we start to share our thinking on the list. The number 1 thing that you need, according to the expert, is the cigarette lighter. That wasn't on my number 1 list. Interestingly, it was on my group list. Next thing, a ball of steel wool. What? That was the last thing I had on my list. An extra shirt and pants for each survivor. Number 3. Number 4, get this, can of Crisco. Some people put that as number one because they thought it was so weird, right? Why would you need Crisco? Here's his reply. This has many uses. A mirror-like signaling device can be made from the lid. After shining the lid with the steel wool, the number one thing you needed, by the way, you need it to light a fire, it will reflect sunlight and generate 5 to 7 million candle power. This is bright enough to be seen beyond the horizon. While this could be limited somewhat by the trees, a member of the group could climb a tree and use the mirrored lid to signal search planes. If they had no other means of signaling than this, they would have a better than 80% chance of being rescued within the first day. There are other uses for the item. It can be rubbed on exposed skin for protection against the cold. When melted, it can be made into oil, like shortening. This is helpful fuel. When soaked into a piece of cloth, melted shortening will act like a candle. The empty can is useful also in melting snow for drinking water. It is much safer to drink warm water than to eat snow, since warm water will help retain body heat. Water is important because dehydration will affect decision making. This can is also useful as a cup. Okay? Now, get this. My team somehow had that as one of the top things that we needed, but it was nowhere on my list. Now, as I'm listening to this scenario, the leader looks around the room and he said, if you had gone down as an individual, how many of you would be dead? For sure me. Because you relied only on yourself and you did not trust the team. This experience totally changed the way I thought about leadership. Had I not seen those numbers, those rankings, and again, remember my little affinity for liking math, had I not seen that in front of me, I would never have been convinced that a group thought would have ever been better than my individual thought. But in fact, it was not just me. It was this room of Harvard participants. So the point here is, want to get it right? Collaborate. Trust your team. Now, when I share this, I want to say that that was one of the experiences that completely changed my neural connections when thinking about leadership. There have been many moments here at Fresno State where I felt like I got things done because I was relying mostly on myself. When I came back, I completely changed the way that I organized and planned for assignments that were given to me that were high level and large scale. And one of those projects, of course, was Discovery. As many of you know, when President Castro came aboard, our bold thinker, Dr. Neff will remember this, he came aboard, he said, on the very first day, and in the very first week of his presidency, was on the front page of the Fresno Bee holding a tablet. And we all said, on the cabinet, oh my. Oh, why, who's going to be doing that? Right? And Dr. Neff and I, and at that time, Andy Hoff, our interim provost, said, oh my goodness, when we walk into the office today, that phone is going to be ringing. And sure enough, the bold thinker said to the provost's office, here's what I want. I have a vision. I want you to run this idea all the way to the edge, but don't go off the cliff. That's a quote. So I said, naively, what about a pilot program? He said, that's not bold. And guess what? That's what the students said too. The students said, not only do they not want a pilot program, they want us to go big, right? You heard President Obama, go big or go home. And they said they didn't even like the word initiative. So we said, okay, we've got a big assignment here. So I fall back on the training in that Harvard experience to think about what was essential. Essential was to survive. Don't go off the cliff. Go right to the edge. Be mission-driven, like Freeman Hrabowski. Be value-focused. It's all for students. It's all for student success. And think about how are we going to put this thing together. The most successful methodology is obviously collaboration. But we have to get the right engaged participants around the table. That means we're going to have shared governance. Oh boy, that's never easy. We also need to have extensive consultation. And we have to have input from team members. Now, how many of you in here were on that discovery planning? All right, so Tasha, you're gonna be my point person here. Those meetings were 1 hour, at first, almost every week. And they moved that fast. But at that meeting, every single participant was asked to speak, right? So we go around the room. Here's what we're thinking. Tasha, what do you think? Marvin, what do you think? Financial aid, what do you think? There would be challenges. There would be places where we would stumble. But we would all say, look at this room of smart people. We'll be able to figure it out. So with that, with every person playing a role, there was empowerment. And it was an intentional empowerment. And we prioritized that we would get every person's bit of feedback because they had something to bring to the success of the idea of the program, just like the survival exercise. Now, when this happens, you do have to have an adept facilitator because just like at the Harvard experience, there will be people that think they know everything, right? And they can't monopolize so that others can't share their wisdom because it's the collective wisdom that is the wisdom that you were trying to find. So you do have to have someone that has good emotional intelligence so that they can make sure that everyone does have time to contribute their very best idea. So shared leadership is what you have in this situation. And Discovery is an example of collaborative leadership. And might I say, one of the experiences that we hear across campus as being well led, because why? It's led by the collaborative. It's led by many. And more importantly, the success of it is everyone's. So that's the other lesson in collaborative leadership. You lead together, you succeed together. And there's no one person that takes ownership of that. So in conclusion, and then I'm going to give you a chance to ask some questions. Some of the takeaways that I hope that you'll gain from my journey is in learning about collaborative leadership as a very, very effective way to lead is, first of all, you have to authentically and truly value the wisdom of the collaborative. I have many occasions where I have leaders that I work with, and I will ask the leader, what does the team think? What do they know, right? And I'll say, wait a second. Okay, I need you to trust the wisdom of the collaborative. Trust it. But you have to truly trust it. Otherwise, it does not feel authentic. You have to also trust the process, because the process is hard. It's very hard. It's harder than I'll just do it myself. Just as President Castro said today, if you want to go fast, go alone. You need to know that truly the best outcomes will come from collaborative leadership. The best outcomes. If you want the best wisdom, you need a team. If I want to point to examples of collaborative leadership that are close to us, I've mentioned Discovery, but if you look at the way that the Silicon Valley is organized, companies like IDEO, who bring psychologists, engineers, anthropologists, right? My MBA people know about this. That's collaborative leadership, right? And so in closing, this is a bold way of thinking. It's a myth debunker. But I hope that you will consider, as you move forward in your own leadership, collaborative leadership as a very successful method. Thank you.